Two security guards blocked her path with stone-cold expressions. "Ma'am, this section is for VIP families only," they said, gesturing for the woman in the faded military jacket to move away from the front rows. What they didn't know was that 6 Navy SEALs were already positioned around the graduation ceremony, watching every move. And in about 10 minutes, this entire crowd would be standing in stunned silence as they learned who this ordinary woman really was. The morning air was crisp with possibility as Margaret Maggie Sullivan carefully pressed her son's graduation cap, smoothing out every wrinkle with the same precision she'd once used to maintain military equipment. Her small apartment in Riverside Falls was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the iron and the distant sound of Danny getting ready in his bedroom. Today was the day she'd been working toward for 18 years. Maggie stood before her closet, staring at the single jacket that hung apart from her few other clothes. It was khaki, military issue, with patches worn thin from years of service and the name Sullivan embroidered in black thread above the left pocket. She'd served as a logistics specialist for 8 years before Danny was born, before everything changed, before she found herself raising a son alone in a town that never quite accepted either of them. Her fingers traced the fabric as memories flooded back. This jacket had seen deployment zones and disaster relief operations. It had been her uniform when she'd coordinated supply drops for hurricane victims and managed equipment inventories in places most people couldn't pronounce. But to the residents of Riverside Falls, it was just another reminder that she didn't belong in their perfectly manicured world of country club memberships and charity galas. Danny appeared in the doorway, tall and lean at 18, his mixed heritage evident in his warm brown skin and intelligent hazel eyes. He was the spitting image of his father, Marcus, a fellow soldier she'd met during her second deployment. Marcus had been killed in a convoy attack when Danny was only 2 years old, leaving Maggie to navigate single motherhood while processing her own grief. "You nervous, Mom?" Danny asked, straightening his tie. He'd insisted on buying it himself with money earned from his part-time job at the hardware store. Pride and determination ran in his blood, gifts from both parents. Maggie smiled, pulling on the khaki jacket. "Not nervous, ready." She checked her watch. "We should get going. I want to make sure we're not late." The drive to Riverside Falls High School took them through the heart of the town, past the pristine neighborhoods where Danny's classmates lived in sprawling colonial homes, with circular driveways and 3-car garages. Maggie had driven these streets countless times over the years, dropping Danny off at birthday parties where she was always the only parent who stayed in her car, rather than being invited inside for coffee. The school's parking lot was already filling with luxury vehicles. BMWs, Mercedes, and Range Rovers sparkled in the morning sun, their paint jobs more expensive than Maggie's annual rent. She parked her 15-year-old Honda Civic in a spot toward the back, checking her reflection one more time in the rear view mirror. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her makeup minimal but carefully applied. The jacket fit well, though it showed signs of age at the elbows and shoulders. She'd polished her black boots until they gleamed, the same boots that had carried her through military bases across 3 continents. "Mom, you look perfect," Danny said, sensing her hesitation. "And I'm proud to have you there." They walked toward the ceremony together, Danny in his cap and gown, Maggie with her head held high. The outdoor venue was impressive, with white chairs, arranged in perfect rows beneath a large canopy. A small stage had been erected at the front, decorated with the school colors of blue and gold. Faculty members moved about with clipboards, making last-minute adjustments. Maggie found her assigned seat in the 4th row, a small placard reading M. Sullivan, parent of valedictorian, taped to the back. She settled in quietly, placing her purse at her feet and folding her hands in her lap. Around her, other parents were beginning to arrive, their conversations filled with talk of college plans and summer vacations in the Hamptons. The transformation began subtly. Mrs. Catherine Whitmore, the unofficial queen of the Riverside Falls social hierarchy, arrived in a flowing cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Maggie's monthly salary. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, and diamond earrings caught the light as she surveyed the seating arrangement with a critical eye. Catherine's gaze landed on Maggie, taking in the military jacket and worn boots with barely concealed disdain. She leaned over to whisper something to Mrs. Jennifer Morrison, another prominent member of the Parent Association. Both women glanced in Maggie's direction, their expressions suggesting they'd discovered something unpleasant. Within minutes, nervous-looking usher approached Maggie's seat. He was young, probably a recent graduate himself, and clearly uncomfortable with his assignment. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, but we're going to need to make some seating adjustments. Could you move back a few rows? We've had some last-minute VIP arrivals." Maggie looked at him calmly, her military training evident in her steady gaze. "This seat has my name on it. My son is the valedictorian." The young man shifted uncomfortably. "I understand, ma'am, but Mrs. Whitmore is a major donor to the school, and she needs to seat some important guests. We'll make sure you still have a good view." The lie was obvious, but Maggie had learned long ago to pick her battles carefully. She gathered her purse and stood without argument, following the usher to a seat in the 6th row. But that wasn't the end of it. Another VIP arrived, then another, each requiring prime seating that pushed Maggie further and further from the stage. By the time the musical prelude began, Maggie found herself in the 10th row, sandwiched between a maintenance shed and the edge of the canopy where the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. From this distance, the stage looked small, the faces of the graduates barely visible. She could still see Danny standing straight and proud with the other students, but she wondered if he could see her. What the crowd didn't notice were the 6 men who had positioned themselves strategically around the perimeter of the ceremony. They weren't faculty or parents, but they moved with the kind of purposeful awareness that came from years of specialized training. Each wore a simple dark suit and maintained a respectful distance from the proceedings, but their eyes missed nothing. These men had served together in various capacities over the years, and they had all trained under the same logistics specialist. At Fort Braxton nearly a decade ago, Staff Sergeant Margaret Sullivan had been their instructor in advanced supply chain management and emergency resource allocation, subjects that sounded mundane, but often meant the difference between life and death in combat situations. Sergeant First Class Mike Torres, now working as a security contractor, stood near the eastern entrance. His weathered hands remained clasped behind his back as he watched Maggie being relocated for the 3rd time. Beside him, Master Sergeant David Chen, who'd transitioned to teaching military science at a nearby college, spoke quietly into his radio. "She's not saying a word," Torres observed. "Just taking it." "That's Sergeant Sullivan for you," replied Sergeant Major James Washington from his position near the stage. "Never complained, never made excuses. Just got the job done." They had all served with distinction, these 6 men, but they remembered the woman who had kept them alive by ensuring they had clean water, proper ammunition, and medical supplies when they needed them most. They remembered the night in Afghanistan, when Maggie had worked for 18 straight hours to coordinate an emergency supply drop for their unit after they'd been cut off by enemy fire. More importantly, they remembered the day she'd saved Private Rodriguez's life by recognizing the early signs of heat exhaustion during a training exercise and immediately implementing cooling protocols she'd developed herself. Rodriguez had gone on to serve 3 more tours and was now raising 2 kids. In Colorado, he would have died that day without Maggie's quick thinking and refusal to ignore what others might have dismissed as weakness. As the ceremony progressed, the 6 men watched Maggie sit with quiet dignity while conversations flowed around her. Not one person in her vicinity acknowledged her presence or attempted to include her in their discussions. She might as well have been invisible. The principal, Dr. Harrison Caldwell, took the podium to welcome the guests and families. His remarks were polished and generic, touching on themes of achievement, community support, and bright futures. He recognized major donors by name, thanked the school board members, and praised the faculty for their dedication. Students began crossing the stage to receive their diplomas, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause for each graduate. Cameras flashed constantly as proud families captured every moment of their children's achievements. Maggie sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the stage, waiting for Danny's moment. The tension in the air was palpable when Principal Caldwell announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present our valedictorian, Daniel Marcus Sullivan, who will be attending Harvard University this fall on a full academic scholarship." The applause was polite but restrained, lacking the enthusiasm shown for other graduates. Danny walked across the stage with the same quiet confidence his mother had instilled in him, accepting his diploma with a firm handshake and a respectful "dum." As he approached the podium to deliver his valedictory address, something unexpected happened. The 6 men who had been stationed around the perimeter began moving with synchronized precision. They didn't rush or call attention to themselves, but their movement was unmistakable to anyone trained to recognize tactical formations. Sergeant First Class Torres was the first to step into view, followed by Master Sergeant Chen, then Sergeant Major Washington. One by one, all 6 men formed a line at the base of the stage, their posture rigid and respectful. The crowd began to murmur, uncertain about what they were witnessing. Danny paused at the podium, his prepared speech forgotten, as he recognized the significance of what was happening. These weren't random attendees or school security. These were professional soldiers, and they were here for his mother. "Ladies and gentlemen," Danny began, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I had prepared remarks about dreams and determination, about the future that lies before my classmates and me. But I find myself compelled to speak about something more immediate and more important." He gestured toward the back rows where Maggie sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap. "My mother, Margaret Sullivan, is sitting in the 10th row today. Not by choice, but because she was moved there by people who decided she didn't belong in the front seats reserved for parents of honor students." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed red, and several other parents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Danny continued, his voice growing stronger. "What many of you don't know is that my mother served 8 years in the United States Army, including 2 combat deployments. She coordinated supply operations that kept hundreds of soldiers alive and safe. She developed training protocols that are still used today. She sacrificed her own comfort and safety so that others could come home to their families." At the base of the stage, Sergeant Major Washington stepped forward, his voice, trained to carry across parade grounds, cut through the air with authority. "Staff, Sergeant Margaret Sullivan," he called out, using her military rank, "taught us that logistics isn't just about moving supplies. It's about understanding that every decision you make affects real people with real lives. She never lost sight of that humanity, even when the rest of us forgot." Master Sergeant Chen added, "Sergeant Sullivan reorganized our entire supply chain during Operation Desert Storm. Her innovations reduced delivery times by 40% and eliminated critical shortages that had been plaguing our unit for months." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even the graduates had turned from the stage to focus on the unfolding drama. Torres spoke next. "She saved my life during a training accident at Fort Braxton. Recognized internal bleeding. When the medics missed it and demanded a helicopter evacuation. Doctors said I would have died within the hour if she hadn't acted." One by one, each of the 6 men shared a brief account of how Maggie's competence, dedication, and character had made a difference in their lives or the lives of their fellow soldiers. They spoke of her integrity, her refusal to cut corners when lives were at stake, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Finally, Sergeant Major Washington addressed the crowd directly. "We didn't come here today to disrupt your ceremony. We came to honor a woman who has never asked for recognition, never demanded attention, never complained about being overlooked. We came because we know what real service looks like, and we know what real sacrifice means." He gestured toward Maggie, who remained seated, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That woman gave 8 years of her life to protecting this country. She gave up career opportunities to raise her son as a single mother. She worked 2 jobs to pay for his education, and never once made him feel like a burden. She deserves better than being hidden in the back row like she's something to be ashamed of. The applause began slowly, starting with just a few people, but quickly building into a thunderous ovation. People rose to their feet, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect for what they had just learned. Even Mrs. Whitmore stood, though her expression suggested she was doing so reluctantly. Danny waited for the applause to subside before continuing his address. "My mother taught me that character isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when no one is looking, when there's no reward except the knowledge that you've done the right thing. She taught me that true strength isn't about demanding respect, but about earning it through your actions." He paused, looking directly at his mother across the rows of seats. "Mom, you've spent 18 years showing me how to be a good man, how to stand up for what's right, and how to treat people with dignity regardless of their background or circumstances. Today, I want to make sure everyone here knows what kind of person raised me." The ceremony concluded with a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. As graduates threw their caps into the air and families rushed forward for photographs, the 6 soldiers made their way through the crowd to where Maggie was sitting. She stood as they approached, her military bearing evident in her straight posture and level gaze. Without a word, all 6 men came to attention and rendered a crisp salute. The gesture was both simple and profound, acknowledging not just her past service, but her continued dedication to the values they all held dear. "Sergeant Sullivan," Washington said formally, "it has been an honor to serve with you." "The honor was mine," Maggie replied, her voice steady despite the emotion visible in her eyes. As the crowd began to disperse, several parents approached, Maggie with apologies and offers of friendship that would have been welcome hours earlier. She accepted their words graciously, but without enthusiasm, understanding that their change of heart came only after public embarrassment, rather than genuine recognition of their behavior. Danny made his way through the crowd to his mother's side, still wearing his cap and gown, his diploma clutched in his hand. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Mom. You deserved better." Maggie placed her hand on his cheek, the same gesture she'd used to comfort him as a small child. "You stood up for what was right, Danny. That's all that matters. That's all that ever matters." As they walked toward the parking lot together, past the expensive cars and designer clothes that had once seemed so important, Maggie reflected on the day's events. The humiliation of being moved to the back row had stung, but it had also revealed something important about the community where she'd raised her son. More significantly, it had shown Danny that real respect and real honor couldn't be bought or inherited. They had to be earned through service, sacrifice, and integrity. The 6 soldiers who had come to stand with her hadn't done so because she'd asked them to, but because they recognized in her the same values they'd sworn to uphold in Day Psych. The days that followed, the story of what had happened at the graduation ceremony spread throughout Riverside Falls and beyond. A local reporter picked up the story, and it was eventually shared on social media platforms where it resonated with veterans, military families, and anyone who had ever been made to feel invisible despite their contributions. Principal Caldwell quietly announced his retirement at the end of the summer, citing a desire to pursue other opportunities. The school board implemented new policies regarding seating arrangements at ceremonial events, ensuring that all parents would be treated with equal respect, regardless of their social or economic status. Mrs. Whitmore's influence within the parent community began to wane as other families distanced themselves from her behavior. She eventually moved to a neighboring town, claiming she wanted to be closer to her aging parents, though most people suspected she could no longer face the whispers and sideways glances that followed her wherever she went. Danny thrived at Harvard, majoring in public policy with a focus on veterans affairs. He never forgot the lesson his mother had taught him that graduation day, that true dignity comes from within, and that standing up for what's right is more important than fitting in with those who hold power. Maggie continued working at the local auto repair shop, where her reputation for honest service and fair prices had earned her a loyal customer base. She never spoke publicly about the graduation incident, but those who knew her saw a subtle change in her demeanor. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity she'd always possessed, but there was a new confidence in her step, a recognition that her worth didn't depend on other people's approval. The 6 soldiers maintained contact with Maggie through emails and occasional phone calls. They had formed a bond that day that went beyond their shared military experience. They had stood together not just for Maggie, but for all the Margaret Sullivans of the world, the people who serve quietly, sacrifice willingly, and ask for nothing, in return except the chance to do their job with dignity. On quiet evenings, when the auto shop was closed and Danny was away at college, Maggie would sometimes take out her old photo albums and look at pictures from her military service. She saw herself as a young woman in uniform, surrounded by fellow soldiers who had become like family. She remembered the sense of purpose she'd felt, the knowledge that her work mattered, that her skills and dedication were valued and respected. The graduation ceremony had reminded her that she'd never really stopped serving, raising Danny as a single mother, working multiple jobs to provide for him, teaching him the values of integrity and perseverance. All of that was service too, even if it didn't come with medals or formal recognition. Years later, when Danny graduated from Harvard Law School, Maggie sat in the front row wearing a new dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. She'd been invited to speak at the event, sharing her story as part of a series on resilience and determination. But she'd declined, preferring to let Danny have his moment in the spotlight. As she watched her son accept his degree, Maggie thought about the long journey that had brought them to this point. All the nights she'd worked double shifts to pay for his textbooks, all the times she'd helped him with homework at the kitchen table after coming home exhausted from work, all the sacrifices she'd made without complaint or expectation of reward. Thus, woman in the khaki jacket had never needed applause or recognition to know her worth. She'd known it all along, carried it within her like a flame that no amount of dismissal or disrespect could extinguish. And on a bright spring day in Riverside Falls, she'd been reminded that sometimes, just sometimes, the world takes notice of the heroes who've been there all along. The 6 soldiers who had stood with her that day had given her something precious, not validation, which she'd never needed, but visibility. They'd made sure that her service, her sacrifice, and her strength were seen and acknowledged by people who had chosen to look past her for too long. In the end, that was all any of us really wants, to be seen, to be recognized for who we are and what we've given, to know that our contributions matter. Maggie Sullivan had spent years being invisible to a community that valued appearance over substance, wealth over character. But invisibility had never diminished her. It had only made her stronger, more determined, more focused on the things that truly mattered. And when the moment came for her to stand in the light, she was ready, not because she needed it, but because she deserved it. The woman in the khaki jacket had always been a hero. It just took a graduation ceremony and 6 brave soldiers to make sure the world knew it too. What did you think of Maggie's incredible story? Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of how they looked or where they came from? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories about everyday heroes who prove that real strength comes from within. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss when we share another amazing story that will restore your faith in humanity. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.